Hey watch friends, today we're going to check out a pair of prototypes from a brand new Italian microbrand. This is Retrovivo, and this is their inaugural offering, the RV01. This will be coming to Kickstarter in mid-February of 2025. I'll of course have a link down in the video description. As of time of recording, the exact date is not yet set, but do subscribe to that if you're interested in checking it out. I'll say right off the bat, this is only coming in at a starting price of $155, so despite the fact that it's Kickstarter, it's a relatively low risk proposition. We're looking at a pair here. As I mentioned, these are prototypes, but if you saw that banner, they do intend to send me a production version, and I always of course want to be upfront about that. We'll take these one at a time as we explore them throughout, really just looking at two different colorways here. As far as the basic specs, measured from roughly the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock position, this is coming in at 39.1 millimeters. The bezel steps down pretty significantly, coming in at 37.9 millimeters. The lugs are a strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug to lugs fairly compact 45.8 millimeters. The total thickness is excellent, coming in at only 9.6 millimeters, and that is inclusive of this flat sapphire crystal, which I do believe includes inner AR. I will say I haven't had any issues with glare or anything along those lines. As far as the movement, this is part of how they keep the price down, but it's not a bad choice in my opinion. This is beating away with a Seiko VH31. For those who are not familiar with that, you oftentimes see the Seiko VK series of mecha quartz movement, but this is actually their more traditional style, so you can see a 3-hand configuration, not a chronograph, but it is still a mecha quartz movement. Where that mechanical portion comes into play, you've probably already noticed, instead of having the typical abrupt tick of a quartz, you can see that this does have a sweep. Certainly, if you notice, it is going to be a little more jarring, it's a little more abrupt with its pulse, because it is a very low beat movement, even like compared to a Seiko, say NH35. This is only coming in at 14,400 beats per hour. So that is going to give certainly more of a staggered kind of feel, or juddery kind of feel there. However, it is much better than a quartz in my opinion. As far as the movement styling, you are going to have hacking with that, so you are able to stop the second hand. Additionally, it does have a 2-year battery life, so that means only every couple years do you have to worry about really setting or adjusting this, and it keeps pretty good accuracy as well, so you really won't even have to calibrate there too much either. The water resistance is coming in at 100 meters or 10 atmospheres. However, on the production version, they are checking with the manufacturer to see, or the production, to see if it is possible to bump that up to 200 meters. So that being said, I personally would not want to see them trade off this thinness to gain the extra 100 meters. I think 100 meters is plenty respectable for this style, but if they're able to get it without increasing the thickness, then by all means, it's going to be great to see that bumped up. As far as the weight, on this included leather strap, this is only coming in at 53.9 grams, so very, very light there. And it's definitely one between the sizing as well as the weight that does pretty much disappear on the wrist, but we'll explore that further. So with all the basic specs out of the way, let's go ahead and dive deeper and get a better feel for what this one's actually like. This is going to be available in the 2 colors that you see here today. There's the black version, which actually has some nice undertones, and we'll talk about that further. And then there's additionally this tan version as well. You're going to notice with both of these that they do have a fine sand texture to them. So it does add some nice kind of gradation and some pattern to that without being too in your face. It's fairly subtle unless you're looking for it up close. Both of them do additionally have a fume or gradient applied. You're going to notice, in particular with the tan version, you'll see that that does fade out to where it's more of like a black, but like a staggered black. But interestingly, on the black version, it's a little more subtle, but that one actually, with the fume, does darken up towards the outside. But what that means is in the middle, you can actually get some really delightful undertones that almost pick up like a tan or bronze in the center. So I think these two complement and play off of each other well. So if you are thinking about buying a pair, I don't know if they're going to have a discount, but really I do think they accent with each other, and I've liked checking them out side by side. As far as the dial layout, these do feature printing at your 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position. You're going to see the Retrovivo name, as well as the Mecha Quartz at the 12 o'clock, and then just the model name at the 6 o'clock. I think it results in a pretty balanced dial overall. It's plenty of breathing room still, especially for the smaller size, while at the same time, I don't mind that they chose printing. I think it fits this somewhat fieldish type look on this one. Additionally, as you move out towards the perimeter, they were going for somewhat of a vintage styling, and you can see that with the loom choice that we'll talk about further. But additionally, though, you can see the colors. They have accent colors just inside of the printed chapter ring. Those are going to be the same on both of these, or at least are the same to my eye. And I think they both really actually accent it well and do achieve that vintage vibe, but it's subtle enough that in both dials, again, unless you're really looking for it, it's easy to miss. So I like that. As far as the chapter ring, again, that is printed right out on the perimeter, has plenty good legibility for it, nice individual hashes, and then at your 5-minute marks, you do have thicker accents as well. Shifting over to the hardware. The hardware on this is what I would describe as being just kind of like a blocky, it's sort of like a pencil type construction, but then out on the tips it does carry through with those rectangular blocks as well. They are going to be faceted, though the facet's very solid, and part of that is because it's a full polish. So you really have to look kind of down at the base to see that there are 3 lines to that, or there's the flat as well as the 2 sides with the faceting. So you do get some decent light play with that overall, but again, with being fully polished, you don't get necessarily as much as you would if that had been like a brush for the center strip. As far as the second hand, you can see the second hand here is a traditional lollipop. For the counterbalance, it did stay with that blocky type theming there, so I think that that's nice and cohesive, but they did, again, with being a traditional lollipop, bringing the circle out towards the tip there. As far as the markers, these are all going to be applied markers all the way around, which, unlike the printing on the dial, I'm very glad to see that they did stick with applied indexes for this. You can see the even is going to be your are going to be numerals, and then in between that you have what I would call a semi-frameless baton. So you can see on the inner and outer edges, it does actually just have straight loom for the cutoff, so no framing for that. And I think it's a good look. It flows well into the dial, and I think it makes it pretty cohesive. As far as the loom, as I mentioned, this is an old radium, so like a vintage style coloration as you saw through the day, but that is C3 for the basis. However, despite the fact that this is C3, I have not found this to be the best performer here. You can see here in the footage, and I will say it's better to the naked eye than it does pick up on camera. However, the hands glow relatively well, but then the markers fade fairly quickly, but none of them are going to be real strong. You can see there is definitely a difference on the right there with the lighter color dial, where it does actually play a little bit of that, picking up kind of the reflection off the crystal and then reflecting off of the light dial as well. As you go across lighting conditions, you of course do get some light play for that. Nothing real pronounced that's going on here, especially since it's not a real in-your-face loom, but really nothing too bad to complain about there either. Shifting over to the bezel, as we already looked at, this is a fixed bezel construction. It is set back. It does have a nice flat and then slope, and then it flattens off again towards the crystal. I think well integrated there. As far as the finishing, you can see it does have a polished lip on the outside, and then you're going to be principally, or I'm sorry, brushed rather, then you're principally going to be looking at polished for your main flat on that actual slope part. As far as the case itself, the case on this, and this is part of the overall thinness, the case is very, very slim. So as you can see here, really it has a traditional configuration. It looks like a slab-ish kind of construction for that, but does have a nice arch and downturn flow to that. But because this is so slim, I'm hesitant to really call it a slab because it doesn't wear like a slab at all. It wears very thin. The finishing is going to be horizontal brushing, so that runs front to rear as your predominant finishing, though it does have, as you can see, a chamfer cut where you get a nice little polished lip on the top, and I do always like when they do this kind of accent. You can see that that becomes more pronounced as you go through the lugs, so I think visually that helps to slim out the lugs as well, and I think it's just a good look overall. As you saw on the edge there too, in addition to the downturn, which does come a little bit proud of the case back, wears very nicely on wrist, it does have drilled lug holes as well. So that's going to make for nice easy strap changes, which again, in being somewhat of like the dressy field styling here, I think that was a good choice. In between the lugs, you can see that this is just a traditional curved case there. And then over on the 3 o'clock side, you can see that this does not have a crown guard, which again, I think is in keeping with the style for this, so no complaints about that. As far as the crown itself, this is coming in at 5.3 millimeters. It does have a traditional coin edge to it. You're going to notice that there's polishing, and then there's just kind of like an etched signature out on the end there. So that is one that I do probably would have probably preferred if that was actually milled down in or pressed for that as opposed to just the etching, but it's not a bad look. The crown itself is a screw-in construction, so that already, like I said, is at 100 meters. Using that, they might be able to get this up to 200 if they can do some case adjustments as well, but again, hopefully all internal case adjustments. Shifting over to the strap, the standard straps on this are going to be leather straps. They are 20 millimeters at the lugs, and then down at the buckle, they do taper to 18 millimeters. They are what I would describe as being a rough cut. It's not really a suede, but it's kind of like a suede look to that on the exterior, though it is smoothly lined on the interior. Up towards the lugs, you can see that this does have the traditional accent stitching. It's going to be white or a creamish color in both cases here. Additionally, the buckle on this, it is going to be a fairly generic. To my eye, it looks like it's unsigned, and it looks like it's maybe like a stone wash finish. It looks kind of like a polish, but with like some little scratches on it, which I think is actually deliberate. And it looks, like I said, like it's a stone wash for that, because it does have those fine little scratches throughout. Really nothing to write home about, but nothing to complain about there either. One thing that I did notice is the strap lengths are different between these two, and these I expect with being prototypes will probably be standardized. I will say on my 6.5-inch wrist here, the black one actually, because the holes stop a little bit differently for the slightly different length, the tan one fits my wrist fine. The black one, I really actually would need another hole or so. So for my case, I'm hoping that they stay with the tan type length, at least for the whole configuration there. The straps themselves are pretty pliable and supple straight out of the box. I don't know how much these have been handled in advance with being prototypes, but I couldn't really see a lot of wear or wrinkles or anything to them, so they seem like they're a nice quality. Leather's not really my thing, but these do seem like good quality straps. Alright, so now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and bring in some comps to get a better feel for how these size up and compare here. So first, this is an MMI Sky Hunter. This one is the smallest of the bunch we'll look at here, coming in at 38 millimeters. However, you can see it does actually have more presence than either of these, despite the fact that these are larger watches here at 39 millimeters versus the 38 millimeters. And that's going to continue as we go through. So this next one, this is coming in at 39 millimeters, but again, this is a Zelos Comet. And again, though, I do think it has more visual presence to this. So these do, I think, present a little bit smaller than they actually are. But for me, that has not been a bad thing, and I think it's fitting of the style. And then the most extreme difference here, you can see this is next to a second hour Saddleberg, and this one's 40 millimeters, to give you an idea there, but a lot more presence on this. Yes, it's a white dial, and those I do think always present a little larger, but you can see it's a pretty significant difference. So bringing that back in, again, with that Sky Hunter, I think that's going to be, I guess, the closest corollary, though even it has more dial presence to it. So really not a knock on these, just something to be aware of, but I do think it's suited well to the size, or to the style rather. So with that, let's go ahead and actually shift over to the positives, critiques, in summary. And first, for the positives, I'm going to start where I just left off. The spotting, I personally think, is spot on for this. I think even though I just showed that they do wear a little bit small as far as dial presence, the case presence is still that of a 39mm watch. So I think it fills out the wrist just fine on my 6.5-inch wrist. It doesn't seem too large. It's appropriately sized. But if you have a larger wrist, I think with this fieldish styling, I don't think it's going to wear too small on you either, depending, of course, on preference. So I think it is well chosen there. The value is absolutely stellar. Coming in at only $155 at launch, it's really going to be tough to go wrong with this for the reasons we'll see and have already checked out further. The styling is somewhat of an understated look, but I think it is attractive. I do think it pulls off that vintage vibe with the dial color choices, with the lume choices, with those accent choices, all that kind of stuff. I think it's well suited and well designed, especially for being a first offering. And then the finishing, I've got to say, this is really respectable for being a $155 watch, being prototypes, and being their first launch. Really nothing to complain about. It's pretty well finished. You've got pretty sharp lines, solid brushing, nice polishing. Really, I mean, nothing to critique as far as the finishing goes, especially considering the price point. But what about some critiques though? First is that on the straps, sorry for bumping the camera there, on the straps you will notice that these do not have quick release spring bars. So while these included ones do have the drilled lugs that you can rely on, I still do prefer to have quick release spring bars. Opinions are going to differ on that. I just find quick release spring bars to be easier there. You still do need, of course, a pin tool to be able to deal with these as well. Yes, it's easier by all means, but I would prefer to see quick release spring bars. The lume, as we already talked about, the lume is underwhelming. You know, certainly that's something I could see them kick up. I think they can get a pass on this because of the style watch it is. I don't think it really needs to have the strongest lume. However, it is something that would be nice to see it kicked up. As we already talked about earlier, with this movement, this isn't really a critique, it's just something to be aware of. If you are very sensitive to jarriness, if you really want a super smooth secondhand sweep, it isn't going to be a high beat movement. It's not intended to be. It's about half the speed of what we typically would call 28,800 beats per hour of starting at the higher beat here, so that's going to be about half that. And accordingly, while I can't normally notice that much of a difference on a lower beat like a Seiko NH35, this one, it's pretty pronounced. However, I have not found, I'm very quartz tick sensitive, I've not found this to be a problem, and I actually think this is a good compromise to still have movement on the dial while still having the grab and go aspect of a quartz. And then finally, just the minute hand length. You can see they stopped pretty well short even of the color accent, let alone the chapter ring. I do think they could and should kick out that minute hand just a little longer, so a minor nitpick there. And overall, all of these, especially given the price point, are pretty minor critiques. So where does that leave us? At the end of the day, as I've already talked about here pretty extensively, at the price, I really don't think you can go wrong. This is a phenomenal grab and go kind of option there. So having the quartz, but still having somewhat of having your running second and still having somewhat of a smoothish sweep for it, I think that's pretty excellent. And then again, as I mentioned, the sizing I think is very versatile, should work for most wrists out there. But then additionally, though, I do think the styling, this can be a little bit dressy-ish, but it really is going to be more casual, but just a grab and go everyday kind of piece, and I think it's very well suited to that. So I hope this has been helpful for you. As always, if you did like it, please do tap that like button. If you haven't already done so, give that subscribe button a smash, and then finally drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. There's only 2 choices here, so I can't say which color is your favorite. It having an extensive list, but which of these 2 do you like? Do you like the overall style? Anything that you feel that they missed? All that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.